When you're ready to work out your composition, it's very important that you understand that you begin with little thumbnail sketches and not jump right into doing a big finished painting right away. And the reason for that is because usually your first idea that you have for the composition isn't going to be your best one, although it could happen. And so if you jump right into doing a big painting right away of the subject, you're drawing it, and you haven't really worked out the composition, the value pattern, all the other things that you learned about or are going to learn about in my complete illustration art course, then you really don't have any kind of roadmap, so to speak, that you follow. And the roadmap can be in these little rough thumbnail sketches. Once you've worked out all of the problems, then you have a roadmap to follow. Then you have a rough sketch, let's say, with your value pattern and your color and the value pattern shapes and the underlying structure and all those other things that go into the making of a finished work of art. You will have worked all of that out in these small rough thumbnail sketches. So let's say you're ready to do a painting. You have to, first of all, like I said, begin with thumbnail sketches. And you may already have an idea in mind as to what you want that painting to say. And if that's the case, then you need to find a structural concept that will help you to get that message across. So what I'm thinking of is I'm going to do a rough color sketch. And I'm starting out, first of all, like I said, with thumbnail sketches. So at this point, I don't have an underlying structure in mind yet, or a structural concept. I do have something in mind, such as, for example, a woman who has these magical powers, and she has power over planets, entire planets. This is a science fiction painting that I'm going to be doing. Since I am a science fiction fantasy book cover illustrator, that's what I'm most interested in. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this rough color sketch that I'm going to be doing. So I have this rough sketch of a figure, and that's my first initial idea of what this figure might look like, what kind of gesture the figure might have. And like I said, at this stage, I don't really have a structural concept in mind yet, but as I work on these little thumbnail sketches, something may suggest to me what the underlying structure might be. So I'm thinking that there's some kind of power coming out of her hand, which you see coming out here, and I also already started it over here. So something is spewing out of her hand, some kind of power. And she has her arm up. So the idea that she has her arm up like that suggests that maybe there should be an upward movement throughout the composition, which would then establish a design theme. The design theme would be an upward movement. But I'm not sure if that's the way I want to go. So I continue to work on the composition, doing these little rough thumbnail sketches. So I'm thinking maybe I'm going to place a planet back here and then another one over here. Do another sketch here, and you can see that it's very rough. So right here, I'm thinking of putting a planet and then another one there. So now I have these circle shapes. Now the circle shapes may suggest to me that the underlying structure could consist of circle shapes or variations of the circle shapes. But I can't just have circle shapes. I need some kind of opposing motif or shape to those circle shapes. But right now I don't know what that could be. So here again, I'm roughly sketching in her gesture or pose as she stands there with her arm up and her hand pointed down with this power spewing out of her hand. And then I'm thinking, well, the costume that she wears, represented by this little dark piece right there, and her arm, when taken together, suggest a half circle, something like that. And then I have the planets in the background, like that, and then another planet over here. So now I'm establishing a structure that consists of these circle shapes. And then maybe her head has an oval shape to it. Then once you have something that you think might work, you can make a larger sketch, more refined. And here is the figure. So just roughly sketching her in. So maybe she's standing there like this with her arm up. The other arm is down. This is another important thing, this idea of opposition. When you have something moving up on one side, you should have something moving down on the other. This is the principle of opposition. If you have a figure, let's say, that's moving or running toward the right, then have the figure looking toward the left. So you get that opposition. The body moves toward the right, the head moves toward the left. This is a principle that is applied to all of the elements of design. Like color, for example. You apply opposition. If you have a green color within the painting, and then the next color would be a color that opposes it, such as a red, which is its complement. So this idea of opposition is very important that you need to apply to your paintings. But I'm getting off track here, and let me get back to this rough sketch. So she has her hand pointing down like that, and then there is this power coming out of her fingers, out of her hand like that, pointing down, with a planet in the background and another one over toward the left, smaller planet. She has a costume here, and she has a necklace on, long hair. I'm thinking of the hair forming an oval when connecting up with parts of her costume. So right here there would be an oval-like shape. Then I have the circle here and a large half circle over here, and that half circle could be extended from her arm down into her upper body and over into a part of her costume that she's wearing to complete that half circle. And she has a belt on like this. Now this is still very rough. I'm just roughly suggesting what the painting might look like once I have developed it further. These are just some initial ideas for the composition. And in back of her, there's a nebula So I started out without any structural concept in mind. And as I worked on these little rough sketches, adding these planets here, I began to think, well, maybe the underlying structure could be a series of circles or variations of the circle creating a rhythmic structure. But I now think that the circles alone are not going to be enough for this structure. I need some kind of contrasting underlying shape. And I'm thinking, well, that might be the triangle. I'm looking at this arm here, and I'm thinking, well, where can I add a triangle? Well, maybe there's a comet here. In back of her, there are also stars and nebula. This is, after all, the universe in back of her, which suggests that she has some kind of power in the universe, or over the universe. And back here, there could be an asteroid or a comet that is traveling, which would connect up with the edge of her arm, thereby establishing an implied line like that. And then this part here, where her power is spewing out of her hand, that could be the other part of the triangle. And then maybe down here where her costume is, I could have an implied line going across at an angle like that, thereby dividing this picture area here into a series of triangular-like shapes. So here's a triangle shape, here's another one, and here's another one, and here is one that is suggestive of a triangular shape. So what I've done is I've established a rhythm of triangular shapes. So this structure is a rhythmic structure. In addition to this rhythmic structure of triangular-like shapes, I have the rhythm of the circular shapes. And even down here where her belt is, there's a circle and then an oval-like shape here, or more like a pear shape, maybe something like this, but it's still considered an oval shape. It's a modified oval shape, and it still belongs to the circle shape family. Therefore, it relates to the circles, setting up a rhythmic structure of circles, and I think that will be my underlying structure. The best kind of structural concept is the one that helps to communicate what you want to say in your painting. And coming up or finding that kind of structural concept that actually supports and reinforces and helps to get that message across of what your painting is supposed to be saying to viewers is the most difficult kind of structural concept to come up with. For example, looking at the circles here that I selected for this underlying structure, why choose the circle? Well, the circle is associated with a protective shape, a protective environment. So if I have something inside the circle here, the circle suggests protection. It is surrounding the subject, protecting it, so to speak. The circles for this painting here suggest that this character that I'm going to be painting is a protective character. The character is protecting the planets, the universe, and is herself being protected, which is suggested by the ovals and circles that are surrounding her, engulfing her. She is being protected, so to speak. you get that feeling. It's an unconscious feeling. You don't intellectually and consciously think about the oval here surrounding the circle as protecting her, but you get that feeling, just like you get that feeling of protection when looking at this and the subject inside of this circle. Let me give you another quick, rough example here of this kind of structural concept that helps to support and reinforce the message. Let's say the message in this rough sketch here is of this mountain lion, let's say. And I'm just roughly sketching this in to suggest that there's a mountain lion up here on this big rock. Okay? So here's this mountain lion on the rock, and down here there's a figure standing. Now the figure sees the mountain lion, and the man here is thinking, well, this mountain lion is going to jump at me. So what is it that I want to say in this rough sketch? Well, I want to say that this mountain lion is going to jump on this figure down here. It's going to jump from the top of that rock down to the figure. Now, how do I get that message across? Through an underlying structure, through a structural concept. I need to establish the feeling that this mountain lion is going to jump down. Well, one way that it might be done is by having this kind of structure in which these lines are pointing down, almost like an arrow, pointing down to the man. So you get the feeling that there's a movement downward, which is going to occur with the mountain lion also moving downward, jumping downward. So I need to establish that within the environment that the figure and the mountain lion is in. So these lines here could maybe be the edge of a mountain right there, moving down toward the figure. And then over here, maybe there's some rocks like that, which suggest an implied line moving over toward the figure. And then this rock here makes an implied line moving toward the figure. So these lines here are all rushing down, moving down toward the figure, just like this mountain lion is going to be moving down toward the figure, going to be jumping to the figure. You get that feeling that he is going to be jumping down any second now. That's the feeling that I'm trying to get across. And these lines, these implied lines moving down in that direction, in a downward direction, helps me to get that feeling across, or that mood across. I'm going to enlarge this so you get a better view of it. So I carried this sketch somewhat further, as you can see here. It's still a rough sketch. You see the mountain lion is directed toward the figure here. So the mountain lion has a downward movement. Just as I showed you in the earlier version, the mountains here and the rocks are pointing down toward the figure, just as the mountain lion is, and the edge of those rocks and the edge of those rocks, they're all moving down, just like the mountain lion is going to be moving down, pouncing on that figure below. So you get that feeling of the mountain lion is ready to jump and move downward toward the figure. And that feeling results from this underlying structure that I established. So the environment itself must support what you want to say. It must be able to get your message across. You don't just place some rocks in there any old place, that wouldn't get that feeling of the mountain lion is ready to jump on the figure across. The structural concept for this rough sketch here gets across what I wanted to say, that this mountain lion is going to jump on that figure. That's what I wanted to say, and the setting or environment is helping me to get that message across. And that's what you need to do when you design your compositions. You need to design them in such a way that the environment or setting in which they take place supports and reinforces and gets that message across of what you want to say about the subject. And if you're able to do that, then the viewer is going to have a powerful experience, because he or she will feel exactly what you wanted to say. Now I want to get back to this sketch here. I'm just roughly going to start this sketch over here. You won't see me doing the entire sketch. That would take too long. So I have a figure here. Just rough her in. Her arm is positioned upward like that, with her hand coming down. Then there's this power coming out of her hand. The other arm is moving down. So there's that opposition that I talked about. One side moves down, the other side moves up. She's looking up toward this power that's coming out of her hand. And then I'll add something here to her costume and give her a necklace. While you're doing your sketch, you try to work in the structural concept that you arrived at in your little rough thumbnail sketches. So I'm thinking of adding a planet back here, because that's what I established in my little sketch. And then another planet here, so I'm getting those circle shapes in there. Her head is an oval. That may change as the drawing continues to be developed. Then her hair here is sketched in such a way so that it, in combination with part of her costume, will form this oval shape that I established in my rough sketch here. So you have to do your drawing thinking of that structural concept, that underlying structure. You have to try to get that into your drawing. Added a comet over here, and then the nebula in the background with stars. So here is a suggestion of that implied line that is part of the triangle that I established in my rough sketch here, and it continues over here, and then there's going to be a line like that completing that triangle. Now it may extend outside of the picture border like you see here, or I may make a change and extend it down like that. I'm not sure yet. So I have my circle motif or shape, and then I have my oval here, another oval for her face, the oval over here where her belt is, and then of course the large circle extending down through her arm and into part of her costume, maybe, not sure yet, or her shoulder. So there's the structure, the underlying structure. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working on this, but as I said, you're not going to see me working on it because it's going to take too long. So once I've finished it, I'll show you the finished rough color sketch. And here is the finished rough color sketch. It's not yet a finished painting, but it's close to being one. Now the underlying structure is there. I've retained it, and you can see that structure right here, there's the circle, and then there's the other circle, which are these planets in back of her. Then there is also a circle here that I didn't establish in my rough sketch here or in that rough drawing that I started. So the structure may be added to or changed in different ways as the drawing develops or the painting develops. So you can't think that what you've established here is not going to change. Most likely there are going to be changes, like you see in this example here. But you try to stay as close as possible to what you worked out in your rough thumbnail sketches or in the drawing that you do. Now, right here, you can see that oval shape. Then there's circle down here where her belt is. Extending up along the comet to the edge of her arm and upward like that is one side of the triangle shape that I established here. And then coming down like this is the other side of the triangle. And now take a look at her costume right here where her fur is. You see, there is an implied line going across like that. You get the feeling that there is a diagonal line, and that establishes the triangle shape that you see here. But it also divides the entire picture area into several triangle shapes that I pointed out to you in the rough sketch. So you see a triangle shape here. Let me change the color, and I think I'll use maybe a red triangle shape right there, and another one there, and of course this large one right there, and then a partial one right there. So it divides the picture area, which, as you know, is all of this, into a rhythmic structure of triangular shapes, and then also a rhythmic structure of circular shapes. Now there's one more shape that I have to add, which extends through her arm, and that's that big circle shape, if you remember. Extends down into her shoulder and on to that fur. So it's something like that. And I think that completes the structure. And it's a rhythmic structure. When you build the underlying structure with your shapes, which are going to be larger shapes, like these, those shapes, however, can also be repeated in the smallest shapes within a painting. The circle that I used is repeated here in her necklace on a very small scale. See, all of these are circle shapes, repeating the larger shapes. Doing this sort of thing where you have large scale shapes and then you have those smaller scale shapes that are the same as the larger scale shapes. This sort of thing, when you do that, it helps to further tie together various parts of the painting. It results in greater unity, in other words. When you repeat the same kind of shapes, unity is established. I think I'm going to darken the entire picture a bit. I think it's a little too light. And the nice thing about working with Photoshop is that you can easily darken the picture by going to Adjustments and over to Levels, and then moving the slider over toward the right like that. And by doing that, as you can see, the whole picture has been darkened. And now that power that's coming out of her fingers pops even more. It appears even brighter now because of the surroundings made darker. So I think I'm going to leave it like that. You could establish an underlying structure that has a rhythm that moves the eye in a certain direction. So you could have, let's say, a series of rectangle shapes like that, and they move the eye from the larger one to the smaller one like that. So this kind of structure moves the eye toward, let's say, the center of interest, which is located here. And maybe there are some spaceships here. This is a hangar where these spaceships are located. There's a platform here. So you have to work that structure of these rhythmic rectangular shapes into the picture somehow. And maybe there's a platform here, and there's a spaceship sitting on that platform there, and over here there's a spaceship that's just coming into this big hangar. Or you could start the picture by not first establishing that kind of rhythmic structure with these rectangular shapes, but you start out with your subject in mind, with this idea of a big hangar here, and as you work on the sketch, a rhythmic structure begins to emerge. It's suggested to you by what you're putting down. So here's a big platform with spaceship here, and then way down here there might be a number of spaceships, and the structure begins to emerge as you continue to work on your rough sketch. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but I'm just letting you know how to approach this. So this kind of structure, since you want it to be a rhythmic structure that leads the eye into the picture, you need to establish some kind of shapes. They don't need to be rectangular shapes or squares. They could be ovals like this that move the eye into the picture, and they can overlap each other like that, intersect each other, and a structure begins to emerge. So here I carried these rough sketches a little bit further. And you can see with this one that there are these oval shapes here, implied shapes, and another one there, large one right there. And this one has those rectangular shapes that make up this structure, this underlying structure. Now this is very rough, but I think you get the idea that you can create this kind of structure that moves the eye. So over here, for example, I could add something else up here, another oval like that. So the eye then moves like this toward that smaller oval shape. Now these shapes are going to be shapes that are implied shapes, although they could be more explicit as well. Like the one that I just added, you can actually make out that that is an oval. And doing this really quick. So other shapes are more implicit. That is, they're not obvious, like this oval here. So there's this oval right there that isn't very obvious because of the shape being more hidden. It's not an explicit shape. An explicit shape is one that is not hidden, that is immediately recognizable. Now over here, I think I'm going to do a quick sketch of this futuristic city in which there is this transportation in these tube-like structures like this, and there's a train-like vehicle that travels through that tube to the city, and I'll give the city this kind of shape that you see here, which is a curved triangle shape, something like this. So that becomes the motif or shape that is repeated to create the rhythmic underlying structure. So the tube goes into that building, and then I'll add some other buildings back here that have that same kind of shape to them. I'll make a change. This is just a rough sketch. So I'm going to have the tube go through that building, enlarge the building somewhat, like this, but keeping that same shape, almost the shape of a cathedral. And then I think I'll just add one more building back here, and that tube is going into that building back there. Now this is just a really rough sketch. And then I'll add some beams down here that are holding up this tube-like structure. So something like this maybe, and then darken this part here. So what I'm doing is repeating that same curved triangle shape. And that establishes my structure, the underlying structure, because you can see that curved triangle shape here for this transportation tube, I guess you could call it, right there, like that. And then I could maybe add something over here, maybe some windows or something to continue that line, to create an implied line. Went ahead and did a little more work on this rough sketch. It's very rough, as you can see, but you can also see the repetition of this curved triangle shape everywhere within this little rough sketch, even the beams that hold up the tube. So even back here, it's all over. And there are variations also of that shape, and the variation could be like this, where it's wider, then more narrow like that. But they're all basically these kind of curved triangle shapes. And that sets up this rhythm of these triangle-like shapes. And right here you see another one, smaller size, larger sizes, all different sizes, all different variations of this basic triangle shape. Some more pointed, like you see here, some more curved, like that one, and some even more curved, like this. And then there's even one that's more pointed, like this, which you see right here. And it's curved. So what I did was establish, first of all, a motif that I was going to repeat, or shape. The motif is the shape, and the shape is the motif. And then I decided to repeat that same motif again and again with variations of sizes and shapes, establishing a rhythmic underlying structure. And in addition to that, if you look right here, you can see that there is a straight line going across like that, and what I actually have to do is add something over here to continue that line. So this is an implied line going right across like that, dividing this picture area here into two rectangle shapes. So there's one rectangle shape here and another one here. And because they are similar in size, they're in harmony. One more thing I need to do, and that is add that tube back here like that. You see that tube? It's actually curving around and then exiting this building and continuing over here into the other building. And by doing that, now I've set up an eye path that the eye follows like this along the tube, and then it curves around like that and into the other tube over there, and is stopped by this building here. So I think that's about all I'm going to do on this rough sketch of a futuristic city. So that's what it looks like, and right here you can see a really tight triangle-like shape, curved triangle shape right there. And of course there's also one here that I mentioned. So they're all over the place, repeated with different sizes and shapes, as I mentioned. So it's very important that you understand this and apply it to your own compositions, creating a rhythmic structure, a rhythmic underlying structure. And now I want to talk about starting a composition without first having a structural concept in mind. You're not always going to have that structural concept right from the beginning. So let me just start something here. Let's say there's this alien here. He's sitting on something. Just a rough sketch here, so you just get some suggestion of this creature or alien sitting here like this. Now, I don't have a structural concept in mind yet, and I'm not sure what I want to say yet. This is actually not the best way to start a picture, although it can be done this way when you don't even have an idea in mind as to what you want to say to begin with. That may emerge as you are putting down shapes and lines and tones, so something may be suggested to you as you continue working on some kind of rough sketch. I went ahead and developed this sketch a little bit further, as you can see, and as I was working on it, a story began to emerge. If you want your picture to be more interesting, you need to have a story that you're telling with that picture. And here you see this astronaut, which is suggested by the helmet and this backpack that he has here, as well as the little spaceship in the distance. So all of that suggests that this is an alien astronaut that has this canister here from which he is releasing these butterfly-like creatures. When you look up here at the top of his staff, you see this sickle. And the sickle is associated with the Grim Reaper. So this alien astronaut is the Grim Reaper. He is the alien Grim Reaper. And then back here you have these figures, and they suggest that this scene is taking place in the past, in a time when men had swords and shields. Every good painting has an underlying structure. The underlying structure holds the whole composition together and moves the eye through the composition toward the center of interest and then to other parts of the painting. For this painting, I came up with an underlying structure, and that underlying structure consists of oval shapes repeated into a rhythmic structure. The underlying structure should be rhythmic. That means repeating shapes that make up that underlying structure. So, for example, the alien here forms this oval. His helmet also has this oval shape to it, but it's somewhat different from this oval. And then the rock that he's sitting on forms part of a circle. Then up here, where these men are standing on this cliff, there's an indication of part of a circle. This curve suggests that there is a circle. And then, of course, at the top of his staff, there is this oval shape there. His spaceship is an oval, and this shield that the figure is holding is an oval as well. So I have all these ovals. The oval shape is a motif. When you are constructing an underlying structure, you have to select a motif. Whatever shape you are using, that shape is a motif. So in this rough sketch, in this underlying structure, the motif is the oval. However, you also need a contrasting or opposing shape. Otherwise, you have nothing but one kind of motif that is constructing the entire underlying structure, and no relief from all of those shapes that are basically the same, like in this case, an oval. So I can't provide more contrast to the structure, which can help me in drawing attention to the center of interest and providing relief from all of the same motif being used. So what do I do in this case? Well, I've already done it. I've created this line here, which is an implied line that runs across the picture area and divides the picture area, which is all of this, into two rectangular shapes that you can see right here. So I'm filling in that rectangle shape with this color. And then I have another rectangle shape down here. So the rectangle shape contrasts sharply with the oval shape. In addition, the straight line that I drew contrasts with the curves of the oval shapes. So I've provided the needed contrast within this underlying structure. And that straight line there and those rectangular shapes contrasting with the ovals here help to draw attention to the Grim Reaper. So right here, as I mentioned, there is this implied line going right across the picture area. Even though this line and that line are separated, because they align, because they are at the same level, this implied line between them is suggested, just like I explained to you earlier. So let me mention something else. Let's say you have a line here, and then you have a line way over here. Even though these two lines are so far apart, there is still a feeling of connection between them because of that implied line that exists between them. So your lines can be pretty far apart like these, and you still get that connection between them because of the implied line. So therefore, in this case here, even though these two lines are that far apart, they still form a connection with each other, just like in this example up here, because of that implied line between them, resulting from the fact that these two lines are at the same level. They are lined up, in other words. Just as these two lines are aligned. They're not at the same level, but they are aligned. That is, they have the same direction. So that if you continue this line, it would connect up with that other line there. Getting back to this rough thumbnail sketch for a moment. When I said that there was an implied line here, it's not just this part where you don't see anything here that can be interpreted as a line. It's this entire line here. That is, right there, this is an edge of a shape. It's not an actual line like that. The edges of shapes are regarded as lines, can be seen as lines. So therefore, this entire line is an implied line. Not just this part where you don't see an edge of the shape. The whole thing here is considered an implied line. And the same goes for this part up here. This is the edge of the cliff. And so is that. But that edge of the cliff is the edge of a shape, and it is considered a line. And that edge of the cliff, when continued by this invisible line, connects up with this line, or edge of the cliff. And all of this together is referred to as an implied line. Not just this part and this part that you don't see. You may be asking yourself, well, how do I begin? Do I begin with some kind of structure in mind, or some kind of structural concept that comes first before I do any drawing, before I actually draw a subject? Or do I first draw a subject and then some kind of structure may emerge out of that? And the answer to that is both. You can do it either way, whichever works best for you. Sometimes you begin with some kind of structure in mind. Other times you don't. You don't have any structure in mind, and you just start working out a composition, and then the structure is suggested to you by what you are putting down, what you are drawing.